Kapila Vatsyayan is the director of the Indira Gandhi National Centre for the Arts in New Delhi. The centre is dedicated to the study and experience of all artistic forms, their interdependence and their relationship with nature and society. This experience is unique in the world. It is the first ever collection of scripts, documents, films and recordings relating to the various artistic expressions of India and other cultures. A lot of space has also been devoted to popular art and village art, which has been handed down through the centuries by word of mouth. No artistic area has been excluded or separated from the others. The centre has collected more than 100,000 slides, 90,000 books, and 10 million handwritten pages in Sanskrit, Pali, Persian and Arabic, which have never before been published. There are various collections of photographs, bought from private sources or from large institutions throughout the world. Numerous audio-visual recordings document the oral traditions of India's various cultural communities. This is perhaps the last chance to record techniques and knowledge that until now have only been transmitted orally and which are about to disappear because of the speed of the westernization process. The academics at the centre have carried out a lot of research in this field. These images, for example, document the martial arts of Orissa. The centre promotes awareness of the historical and cultural links between India and the other countries of Asia. One of the latest exhibitions was dedicated to drawings on rocks from the ancient world.
We have 64 arts, that is anything that is skill, from cooking to poetry reading or whatever is an art. So the simpler definitions of art are not so, that anything which is skillful and which makes a design which has symmetry, even if it is based on the principles of a symmetry, and has formal values which can be ascertained, can be called art. However, when you go into the deeper sources, you're in trouble. You're in great trouble. What constitutes art? Then is art something different from the act of meditation, contemplation, as we talked a little while ago in the context of Ellis Boner, of the challenge to empty yourself? Is art not the first demand that art makes on you, is that you should transcend yourself, the small I in you? There can be no art if there is the I, and yet there can be no art unless there is the I to express it. Again, we are back to the question of the instrument, that the maker has to be annihilated, or the maker must realize that he is not. Because if the maker is in the center, there is no art. And unless there is a maker, there is no art. And therefore, I think all art that we recognize as art emerges again from this source of call it emptiness or fullness, it's the same thing. But certainly a moment where the small I or the ego, we're not talking either Freudian or Jungian psychology, this assertion of individuation has to be transcended. And then from that experience, everything that we call expression, and it can be expression ranging from what we call the sciences to metaphysics to artistic modes, this is a question of skill then. It is a question of the values that you give through a particular medium, architecture, sculpture, painting, music, words. But these are only parts. Its quintessence lies in when all this is gone. And that comes back to both its maker and to the receiver as manna from the heavens again.
Art in India has never been separated from the other aspects of life or from other disciplines, as is clear from the history of literature and archaeology. Each form of art can be clearly distinguished. It has an autonomous form, but it can only live if it is connected to the all. There were two main reference models for understanding physical phenomena: the rhythms of the universe, the mind and spirit of man, as integral parts of a single ecological system. The first model was the human body, in Sanskrit, Purusha. The body is made up of different systems, from the nervous system to the circulatory system to the digestive system, which are connected and interdependent. And the body unites matter and spirit, the physical and metaphysical aspects. The body is a microcosm that mirrors the macrocosm. The second model is the cartwheel, which is made up of a center, the hub, spokes, and a circumference. There is an internal center and an external movement towards multiplicity, which, however, is contained by the circle. The center symbolizes contemplation, individual introspection, liberation. The spokes represent active life, that is, controlled participation in desire, pleasure, knowledge, power, and duty. Time is cyclical, and the end is a return to the beginning. As in many other ancient civilizations, awareness of the outside world and knowledge of man's interior universe were intimately and mutually connected. In the Rig Veda, it is written, "There is only one truth, but it is expressed in many different ways." All of India's arts have been developed on the basis of this vision of the universe. The aesthetic experience comes from life, and it develops within its limits, but it tends towards the universal and the transcendental.
Tradition, again, etymologically and from the Latin roots to its Indian counterpart called parampara. And we must remember that in both these discourses in language, at no time has it been a static category. And tradition means passing on, as you know better than I do. And in parampara, it means a flow from one to the other. And that flow can never be a static flow, and it cannot be a fixed time thing. And the tradition can only be a tradition if there is an element and a concomitant element of continuity as also change in it. So that it has to flow along a certain path. The path is directionally it is made out, but on that path there is the flow continues and changes take place. In India, everything that we pride ourselves, which we call traditional, except for the recitation of the Vedas, which is immutable and which was perhaps exactly as it was when it was. Now, the interesting thing about India, and I think this is its secret, is that the tradition allows for change from within it. It allows also dissent within it, with the result that while changes take place, metamorphoses take place, there is no breaking from certain fundamental laws. So within those parameters, 1,000 or more permutations and combinations can be worked out. This is true especially in music. It is true in dance. It is true in certain forms of theatre, not all. But it is not true in Indian literature. Because the sensibility there has changed, or did change. We're coming back to the sensibility in Indian sculpture changed. While there was a continuity in the artisan tradition, in the modern urban artist who was individual, confronting, facing, challenging society, the tradition did not. So we have to make a distinction in each of these arts. What forms the ocean without the salt? What forms the cake without the sugar? Culture is that quintessence of the human being, singly or collectively, which is still with him when everything else is lost. You're from Europe. You know what happened to the prisoners of war in concentration camps on either side. I've had occasion to visit some of them. I have seen my own family here, people who had been to jail and who were persecuted, not because they were only people with idealism, but they were men of culture or women of culture. That at the greatest moments of stress, have you seen a poor man smile? A radiation which can come on his face? That is culture. Have you seen a person, a mother who may not have anything in terms of affluence, but what she can do to bring about a sense of beauty in the daughter that she is bringing up? And culture is not a matter of entertainment and luxury. And therefore, any new definitions of culture, which says that culture is also essential after economic development takes place, is a perversity. Culture, I think, is basic. And then you cannot distinguish it from everything that the human has which is given to him to refine his sensibilities and to create about an integral relationship of the body, mind and soul. That to me is culture.
Indian architecture, be it a temple or a modest home, always starts from a center and then expands outwards as a circle or a square. Every detail inside the building has individual characteristics, but it is never autonomous because every detail is an integral part of the whole. As a whole, the architecture represents the cosmic order of Earth, provoking a sense of wonder which brings about the transcendental experience of bliss. You move from the outside in, walking around the temple until you reach the center, which represents emptiness, void. The temples in the north and the south, the Buddhist stupa and the mosques express the same transcendental significance and provoke the same profound experience. The artistic language is both universal and local, eternal and historical. Every image represents an abstract and impersonal state in a definite form, which evokes, at the same time, dynamism and peace. Every image is born from life. It is closely connected to the cultural fabric, and yet it transcends this. Buddha is Siddhartha, the ascetic Sakyamuni, but he is also the symbol of the compassion and grace of the Absolute. Every image of Buddha, be it Indian, Cambodian, Japanese, or Chinese, represents one of the countless subtle nuances in the vast ocean of compassion. The many faces and arms of the Hindu gods, in all their terrifying or peaceful aspects, represent the infinite artistic expressions of the intangible and interior experience of transcendental unity, which is without form and beyond all form. The patterns, styles, and clothing of the characters in the sculptures or bas-reliefs give them a historical and cultural identity. But the sublime aesthetic experience that they provoke, the rasa, goes beyond all cultural and national factors.
The word rasa can be translated in the English language by several words. Juice, fluid, taste, literally that which is the taste of a meal after you've had the meal, when you can no longer distinguish. At another level, now as metaphor, it is that ecstatic state of release, and rasa is that quintessence of the aesthetic experience, both from the point of view of the creator as also the receiver. The other level is in terms of the content of art into certain states of being or moods or predominant emotions, and these states are belonging to all human beings, or I would say all sentient beings in a way, because they are the states of love, of pathos, of valor, of anger, of hatred, of disgust, of fear, and ultimately of wonder, and the wonder then leading to a state of tranquility. Let's look at the piece of architecture, the Church of Chartres. There is a horizontal movement which is taking you from the outside to the inside. There is also a vertical movement which is taking you from the ground to the sky and the pinnacle. And after you have circumambulated or gone into the church nave or come out or seen the stained glass windows, what is it that it brings to your mind? A state of wonder, an absolute state of amazement. Then you forget all the small imagery, you forget the details, you even in a way forget the structure. But what remains is this state of wonder. You hear a great symphony, you hear Beethoven's Ninth, or you hear some of the compositions of Vivaldi or something. At the analytical stage, you're talking about sharp and flat notes, you're talking about the octaves, you're talking about his dealing with the 3 octaves, you're talking about counterpointing, you're talking about harmonics. At the end of the Ninth Symphony, especially after the 3rd movement, is there anything left except this great sense of wonder as to what Beethoven, or what it was, you don't even remember Beethoven. What is the residual echo inside your mind? And that's wonder. Dostoevsky said that beauty would save the world. There is the other English saying that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And therefore, something that we have to get away from is that beauty is not confined only to outer form. And beauty is that perfect sense of symmetry, I would say, even if it is in geometrical terms, it may be asymmetrical, where the inner and the outer, and where the horizontal and the vertical, I'd go a step further, and where I would say that the micro represents the macro and the macro the micro. When that happens, there is this sense of beauty, a sense of beauty, a beauty which is contained in form but which is beyond form. And I think this concern with beauty has been a concern, perennial concern of all artistic traditions. However, Greek art has articulated it, and Greek theory has articulated it much more pointedly. In India, at the explicit level, there isn't that concern with beauty qua beauty as a concept in aesthetic theories. This is my reading of it. What is dance? What is dance? What is that moment when you call human movement as dance and not as movement? It's also the same thing in music. Not all sound is music, but would there be music without sound? Etc., etc. And the same thing with language. The language of ordinary discourse, what we are talking, is not poetry. But the same word set in another organizational structure, not necessarily just rhyme and meter, would become poetry. So what is it that distinguishes it? It is once again, it is that inspiration of giving the ordinary extraordinariness. My gesture can be a simple gesture like this, which can be an ordinary gesture, it can be a very mundane gesture. But the moment this gesture, I give it a certain meaning of communication. The hand is still in this, and it becomes a dance movement. What is it that I have done here? I have abstracted that in terms of its ordinariness to give it some quality which will communicate depersonalized, let's put it like this. And dance is that capacity of, it is in animals, there is the dance of peacocks, there is the dance of birds, there is the dance of animals, of fish, of whatever. That the sense of rhythm in pure corporal frame, which is imbued with a sense of release at the spiritual or the emotive, makes something dance. And that dance is, to my mind, the finest, where the subjective self is not being expressed. And where, as Yeats said, that there is the dancer, no dancer. Indian dance is concerned with the body in a way, but is using the body only as an instrument in which the body itself is abstracted. And the Indian dancer's concern is with really trying to transcend time through time and also to remain with gravity. Indian dance, almost like Indian music, is concerned with the minutest movements which can be contained in time or rhythmic cycles of time in order to transcend time. And this is the paradox with which we are dealing with. The Western dance is trying to free itself from gravity. All those great leaps and jumps that you have in ballet, it is trying to cover as much space as possible. And its concern is with both material space and mental space. All arts, but dance is certainly that state of release. Even if it is a momentary release, but if you've had that experience once, you do the same movement every day, and then one day you know that it happened.
What's the relationship? And
The centre, run by Kapila Vatsyayan, is linked with other people and institutions working with the same spirit in the West.
System of production man. And
In January 1997, the centre organised a dialogue among people who were trying to understand clearly the significance of tradition. tradition is always on the move. Society has to assimilate new ideas, but at the same time, it has to base itself on its own past experience.
What we're trying to do here is exactly to make this bridge between the textual and the oral traditions. Because one part of the knowledge was transmitted, and a very great part of both knowledge as also wisdom, not to speak of information, through oral transmission. The other, much later, was transmitted to the written word. So our programs here are absolutely interlocked, that while we are exploring the textual traditions, we have a complementary program on exploring the oral traditions. What naturally happens, and this is what is the condition by the 20th century, that that which is in the textual traditions in its output comes out as a written work, and so you see our 20 volumes on the different texts. What do we do with our work in the oral traditions? If we put it in a book, then it becomes already written. It doesn't. So we have about 12 field programs going on in different parts of India, in which we are exploring both aspects of semantics, vocabulary, language, expression, more, because the oral traditions are situated in context and they are with a life situation. So we have called them really lifestyle studies. And then the output of this is in a series of films which we are doing. And we made 4 films already, one on the Meiteis in Manipur, then in Meghalaya, and then there is, we're doing something in South India, and alongside, we're doing a great deal of recording of technical knowledge which is transmitted orally, which ranges from Vedic transmission intonation system, and we've done a 40-hour recording of the different streams of Vedic recitation, and as much as we can, because one of the things about oral transmission is that these formulas and everything, and which you know, which Alice Boner has also said in her writing, these are secret, and in terms of the skills part of it. So while we have done some recording of artisans in terms of how they transmit knowledge and skill, I'm unable to make them, or I'm duty bound not to make it public just now. But I'm very conscious of the richness of the oral traditions in India, and we're trying to do what we can. We're thinking of a collective which is seeing life phenomena or universal phenomena in terms of certain sustained metaphors. These sustained metaphors are then concretized through different formal values as which we recognize as symbols sometimes, or we recognize in a ritual as a language of that. And this collectively becomes the images of a culture. Now, to keep to the Indian tradition for a minute, as illustration, in terms of its metaphors, it saw its rivers as goddesses. It saw the trees as deities, which happened in Greek mythology to a point. It saw emptiness as the full jar, kumbha. It saw the intertwined snake as the continuity of time and cyclic time. It saw the image of man as a principle of the universe in its interconnectedness of the parts and the whole. It saw a man-woman relationship in terms of the principles of static and dynamism, or stillness and movement. It saw seed as general growth and reseeding, and therefore the temple begins from or the stupa begins from the seed and goes, and the upper part is again the seed. It saw the metaphor of the womb house, and that womb was that secret, potent, unmanifest, which manifested itself in all its diversity. This was imagery which you see in poetry on the walls of Indian temples or stupas, or you see it in Indian painting, you see the seasons as sung in Indian music, and you see it in dance. Can you compare this with the imagery or the images that you see in mass media today? I think it is disruptive, it is intrusive, it fragments you, because you're living from moment to moment to moment. And as all the mass media people tell you, there can't be any more attention beyond 3 minutes, and you must not do anything after. Are we morons of a kind that we cannot keep concentration beyond 3 minutes? I'm being told every day, madam, not more than 3 minutes. People cannot. Retention is, I don't know which brain theory people talk about. So what is this about this imagery, that the imagery has to move? Before I've taken it in, it is gone. Even my retina cannot take it physically. Second and more important and devastating is the attitude towards the body and the senses. Because both these are being used, the figurative human form, as also sensibilities for arousing sensation, but not for refining. I mean, this is an extreme statement I'm making. There are very fine departures, and one could think in terms of the imagery that has been created by some of the films of Bergman, the imagery created by Rossellini, the imagery that has been created by some of the greatest films from Europe. Yes, we're not talking about that, but we are talking about the general imagery of consumer culture. We have lost the connection with the mythical world, and no reality is worth living as far as I'm concerned unless it is the myth which gives it the meaning. And man, and this is global. This is global. I mean, whether Africa or the Aztecs or the Olmecs or the Greeks or the Eskimos or whatever else, or the Indians, I mean, look at these cultures. They lived by their myth. And they made life both plausible and beautiful to live because the mythical world was alive. And the modern world has killed myth. And in killing myth, it has dehydrated one part of itself. If the human mind can sustain that source from which new myths can be created, there is hope. There is hope, like, the hope that comes in those war novels of the Czech writer Karl Čapek. Čapek's thing, R-U-R. And so he creates at the end of this terrible civilization, he creates that it's not a myth, but that if there is love, there is possibility of a future. And never forget that those two characters, the whole of this mechanical civilization or society is dying, and then only these two robots are left. And everything has been programmed. Only what has not been programmed is smiling or love. And then they have this tremendous scare that they also don't know what it is to face death. And then they look at each other, and one happens to be programmed as a boy and the other as a woman. And they smile and there is love. Worshipping rivers, going to mountain shrines, going to temples where there are the confluences of rivers, which is what the texts speak of. Sacredness does not lie in outer ritual. Sacredness lies in my establishing that it continues to be sacred by my making it pure and my being pure. And therefore, it is essential that part of my, whatever we call this worship, is not confined to small ritual of morning and evening. It must extend to the fact that I keep the river water clean, that I throw no litter in it, that I throw no effluents in it, that I leave no litter in the Himalayas which I go to worship, that I keep my ocean clean, that I keep the air clean. Only then am I worshipping. Would the human being be there if there wasn't the natural environment? To my mind, one of the most fundamental things of a worldview, especially in India and the culture to which I belong, was that man was one amongst all life. Also that there was a connection between inorganic and organic life. What modern science is telling us today about the principles of mutation, where matter can become energy and energy can become matter, intuitively or speculatively, the Upanishads articulate this all the time. And in such a situation, where I am but a speck of a much, much larger universe, and my life is dependent on this, what we call the natural environment, is, I think that unless I have a sense of both humility as also a sacredness towards this natural environment, I cannot survive. If I don't look after it, it is at my peril. And it's only man's arrogance, man's or human being's arrogance, which appropriates upon itself the prerogative of thinking that he can control the environment. And we know that in the last 100 or 150 years, what man has done with the environment, where he has brought the globe to. And this relationship is basic, and it is an indispensable given of the human condition. I feel very strongly about this.